Lately I've found myself interested in 90s survival horror games, specifically for the PlayStation 2. I've recently purchased Obscure on Steam, and I've been trying to emulate Silent Hill 2 with very little success, but I've been curious about Hell Knight, Extermination, and Manhunt as well. But while I was looking around, I noticed something. Jurassic Park Survival. Immediately I was intrigued. A Jurassic Park survival game sounds like it could be great, like a more serious version of Dino Crisis, and if handled correctly, it could be a funner game too. And so I looked into it further, and discovered something kinda disheartening. The game was never actually released. Cancelled in the early stages of development, all we have left now are some images and what game reporters had to say at the time. It was a disappointment, but it's not like there aren't dinosaur-oriented survival games. Turok and King Kong sorta come close to being what I want, kind of. The issue I have is that there's a clear lack of good Jurassic Park games, specifically shooters and adventure games. The park builder games are decent, but that's a less accessible genre for many players. It's a little sad to say that my personal favourite Jurassic Park game is Operation Genesis. That's a great game, but if there was an amazing survival game, it would immediately replace that. There are a lot of arcade games, most of them being rail shooters. I've played a couple, and they're fun, but not exactly what I'm looking for. What I was hoping to experience was something similar to Resident Evil 4 or Alien Isolation. Just replace the alien with a couple of raptors and have it be set in the original park. The kitchen sequence in the first film is one of the most nerve-wracking scenes, and I think adapting that into an interactive experience would be perfect. I don't want to focus too much on the pre-2000s era Jurassic Park games. Some are good for sure, but hardware limitations and the fact that video games were still in their infancy prevented these titles from really achieving their full potential. Almost all of them are side-scrolling platformers, which are very of their time. That type of game was everywhere back then, but nowadays I don't think it would be suited for a Jurassic Park adaptation at all. So what was Jurassic Park Survival going to be? The game was going to follow an original character and be set on a secret second island. It would have been an original story despite being a tie-in with the new Jurassic Park 3. Like most survival horror games, it was going to have a third-person perspective, and the basic gameplay loop would have consisted of exploring different areas for key items and increasingly stronger weapons. The game was going to feature the following dinosaurs: Spinosaurus, Velociraptor, Compsognathus, Pteranodon, Pachycephalosaurus, Brachiosaurus, Tyrannosaurus, Ankylosaurus, Triceratops, Parasaurolophus, Dilophosaurus, and Troodon. The team was putting a major emphasis on problem solving and third-person interaction with the environment. Apparently they were attempting to emulate the gameplay style of Tomb Raider in terms of movement, puzzles, and exploration. This is kind of funny considering the presence of dinosaurs in many of the early Tomb Raider games. They wanted to incorporate some interesting gameplay mechanics such as roll shooting and climbing in order to add depth. Another function of this was to enable the player to outsmart the dinosaurs in order to escape instead of having to fight them, in true survival fashion. There were also plans for the dinosaurs to be able to problem solve, which would have been an impressive feat for the AI to achieve at the time. My guess was they were attempting to emulate the way the raptors behaved in the first film, with them adapting to new situations and problem solving. Admittedly, this would have been a complicated task, but it would have been interesting nonetheless. We sort of got a similar thing with Alien Isolation, but even that isn't perfect. As Joel proved, even the alien can be fucking stupid sometimes.
You idiot! That's right, you cannot catch me! No. Hey, alien fucker!
Before the cancellation, 3 weapons were revealed: the cattle prod, a handgun, and the rocket launcher. So why was the game cancelled then? All of the stuff I've already mentioned sounds really promising. Well, it all came down to money. The game was cancelled due to budgetary reasons. The developers, Savage Entertainment, were fresh to the video game scene at the time and would mostly develop film tie-in games before they went defunct in 2011. Some notable games from them are the Star Wars Battlefront 2 game for PSP, Medal of Honor Vanguard for PS2, and Wall-E for PSP. The Wall-E game in particular was a favourite of mine growing up, and the rest of their games are pretty decent as well. It's a shame that they're not around anymore, but film tie-in games are kinda dead now anyways, so whatever. I'd love to see a true Jurassic Park survival game, but for now there are several other games, both Jurassic Park related and not, to mess around with. I want to go for a real stinker first. The Telltale game. This is notorious for being one of their worst titles. Because Telltale was a small-scale studio, it was inevitable that some elements of the game would be less polished. Even their more successful titles like The Walking Dead and Wolf Among Us are kinda graphically shit, but they at least have good writing, pacing, and characters. Hating on this game isn't a new thing, so I won't harp on for much longer. The other thing I wanted to briefly mention was the hilarious controversy that followed this game after release. Because of the middling reviews the game received, several Telltale employees decided to leave 10 out of 10 reviews on many sites. The employees' reviews were all deleted and the company was forced to release an apology. I find this so funny considering many game companies today will inflate their review scores by buying off journalists and websites, but I don't think I'd be able to get away with not talking about what is widely considered to be the best Jurassic Park game of all time, Trespasser. Yes, the game was a commercial failure, and upon release everyone kinda thought it sucked, but it's been 20 years since. The game has a dedicated fanbase of modders and amateur developers who have created level editors, fan patches, and upscaled texture packs. Similar to the wave of people that fixed up Bethesda games through patches and modding, Trespasser has a very similar community. And despite its lukewarm reception, the game went on to inspire fucking Halo, Far Cry, and Doom 3 of all things. The gameplay is a little lackluster, the game is graphically hideous, and it had some of the worst optimization for any game. It's up there with Crysis and Cyberpunk, believe it or not. But thanks to the fans, the issues involving the bad resolution and frequent crashing have been addressed. If you played the game back in the 90s and absolutely hated it, now would be a good time to return to it with all these fan-made enhancements. Lastly, I wanted to talk about Jurassic Park dinosaur battles. Reviews seem to be kind of split down the middle, with some saying it's just a bad Pokemon ripoff with awkward controls, and others saying it's just as good as Operation Genesis. That's a bit of a stretch. If you wanted to play a Jurassic Park game though, Operation Genesis really is the best thing out there. Unless you have a PS2 copy of the game, you won't be able to find it digitally for PC. It's essentially abandonware at this point, similar to the Starship Troopers game. Like Trespasser, this game has a dedicated modding community. This game was near perfect on release, but people have added some quality of life improvements, more dinosaurs, and different skins/textures. I highly recommend this game, but getting it to work with newer systems can be a challenge. The resolution is kinda dogshit and the audio can be really crackly and awful, but there are fan-made options out there to tweak all of these. With that, I think this video's over. This was an interesting deep dive for me, and was also a great excuse to play some of these games again. I always come back to Operation Genesis every now and then, but playing Trespasser and stuff was pretty enjoyable. These older abandonware games usually have very dedicated fan bases, so a lot of these games have mods and fan patches to make them more playable.